We are, I think, at the bottom of Tzadik Ches Merala. I believe that's what we are up to. And I wanted to finish up Tzadik Test today. Let's start from the one dot at the first wide line. So it'll be sort of at the beginning of an inyan. Amorava. Hi man. The Zavin lechavisa de chamra lechanva. And we said the Rashbam learns that it doesn't mean sold, it means it was given on consignment. Thank you for helping me with that word yesterday. Adaita l'svuya, to sell slowly, bit by bit. V'takif apalga oyatelsa. After it was halfway sold or a third of the way sold, the barrel went bad. It became vinegar. Dinahu, the halach is the makabel lomine. The person who's selling it, the consignment store, he's pottering onto it. And he can just give it back to the owner, and the owner has to accept the bad wine back. Toysbus learns it was actually a sale, and is working with the same svara that if it goes bad, it's on the moicher. Beloya moran, this halacha doesn't apply. Ela deloy shani bebarz. That's only if the person who owned the consignment shop didn't put in a different or change the place of the spigot in the barrel. In other words, he didn't tamper with it. Well, shani bebarz loy because it might have been due to where he put the barz. Beloya moran ela deloy moto yoimudishuk. Again, it's only if there was no negligence on behalf of the consignment store, meaning he put it on the shelf right away and he started promoting it, sell it right away. And therefore, he could try to sell it as quickly as he could. But if the day of the shuk passed, meaning that he didn't properly market to sell the wine, and because of that, it was on the shelf too long, once again, the person who owns the consignment shop has some liability. Haimanda Kabul Chamra Adaita the Mamtile the Parvasa the Volshapot or the Zolshapot, according to certain curses. I gave wine. This is not a consignment. This is already an iska, where I supply the wine and you supply the services, and we split the profit as well as the losses 50-50. And the deal was that you were going to take it to the marketplace in Zolshapot or Volshapot. I think it was a city in Poland, Volshapot. Could be a Polish city. That's what it sounds like. And there, the wine would have sold for a much higher price, typically. And what happened is before this Baliska, before the entrepreneur left to go to Volshapot, the wine had went up already, that they could have sold it right here in the city that they were at a handsome profit. And the owner said, no, I don't let you. I insist that you go to Zolshapot because I want to get even more money for it. And what happened? By the Mati Hasam, Zol. By the time he got to Zolshapot, the price of wine across the board dropped, and now they're losing money. So the halach is Dina Hu de Makabale. Again, the Bailam who insisted on not selling it here, he has to accept that loss. What about Havachala? What if the price didn't go down, but their wine became vinegar in that time where he had to schlep the Zolshapot? Now what will be the halacha? Amalei Rav Hillel Rav Ashi, Yavon Bei Rav Kahana, when I was by Rav Kahana, Amalan who told us, Chalaloi, if it turned vinegar, they both have to accept equally the loss. Udaloi, Rabbi Yosy Bechanina. This would not be consistent with Rabbi Yosy Bechanina, who taught us at the beginning of this Amud that in fact that if it became the moicher, Amar lei ha chamrach vakan kanach, meaning he demands a much longer warranty, right? But the ikadamri afilu chala nami mekabel kaman Rabbi Yosy Bachanin, or maybe he said that the moicher is responsible like Rabbi Yosy Bachanin. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the warranty you have to provide on wine, when it's in your own barrel, we have a shmuel or our either Shmuel or our Bechia Bar Asi, what was his name? Rabbi Barchia? 1 second. Who argued on Rabbi Yosy Bechanina? We had it right up over here. We had it right over here. Rabbi Bar Yosef. So Rabbi Bar Yosef holds there's no warranty at all because you say that it's Maslo Garam. Then we had Rav, who held the Mocher has to give a 3-day warranty, right? And then we have on the other extreme Rabbi Yosy bar Chanina, who expects a long-term warranty. And we paskin, I believe, like Shmuel, or at least that's how they're respond for Zois, that there is no warranty that you could say Maslo Garam. Zok to Gemara. Yoshon Mishalosh Stuff. If I said it's going to be old wine, it had to have been from last year's wine. Tana we learned. We learned regular wine only has to last until Atzeres, because we said that you made Thomas things are very warm, and wine has a trouble lasting through the warm weather. But if you said Yoshon, then you're not only saying it's from last year, but it has to last till the full end of the year, which is till Sukkot. It'll have to last even longer. So when you say I'm selling the Yain Yoshon, it's a very robust and aged wine. Zok the Mishnah weiter. And the Bach adds a lot. What was the purpose of the place in my property that I'm selling you? It's lasses like either beis chasnus levnoi, either to make a place for my son to live as a married man, or uves almanus levitoi, or to build a house for my daughter. If she became almana, she's coming back to build a place for her to live. V'chein hamakabel mechaveroi lasses lebeis chasnus levnoi, or if a contractor made a deal with someone to build a beis chasnus for his son, or uves almanus levitoi. So whether you're selling property based on this description, or whether you're building something on this description, how big is this property going to be? How big does a building have to be? Boina arba amos al sheish. It's 4 amos by 6 amos. Is the size of the house. It's what we call a container home, a micro container home. 4 amos is what, about 8 feet by about 12 feet. That is it's like a sukkah. It's like a sukkah in Borough Park. Huge. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shmuel Eimer, you call this a house? Refes Bokerhi. At best, it's only a barn. Not going to be adequate. Zok to Gemara weiter. Refes Bokerhi. Haroitza lasis Refes Boker. What if you actually made a deal to make a Refes Boker? Boina dalar amos al sheish. That is 4 by 6. As Rabbi Shmuel described a Refes Boker. Bayis Kotan. If it's a bayis cotton, if you said I'm building you a bayis cotton, then it's sheish al ches. Godol, a big house, is ches al eser, 8 by 10. Traklin, which is already a palace, is yud al yud. How high, how tall must it be? Rumoi kechatzi orkoi u kechatzi roch. So if I measure the length, and let's say it's 10 by a traklin, and then measure the width, which is 10, that's 20. Half of that is 10, so it would have to be 10 amos high. It's a pretty high ceiling. Where do we see this concept? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer kevinyan ha'hech. That's how the hechel was. The hechel was, well, let's see what it was. It was 50 by 100, so that's 150. Was it 75 amos high? I'm not sure. We'll have to see how that works out. And the Gemara is going to spend some time focusing on the height of the Beis Hamikdash that Shlomo built. What about the opposite? Maybe it was a place for your daughter to live when she was married. Or a place for your son to live when he loses his wife. It's teaching us a lesson. It's not good for a son-in-law to live near his mother-in-law. It says in the Sefer of Ben Sira. Now, Ben Sira was a chacham who wrote Svarim Chitzonim that you weren't allowed to learn, but there were certain things that Chazal picked out from the things that he wrote that we use as we are using over here. Who Ben Sira was, I think the Tata say he was a son of Yirmiyah Navi, but something to do with an Ambati. His mother became expectant because of Zera that was in a mikveh. That's why we changed the water before on Friday afternoon. We changed the water of our mikveh because they're not allowed to use the same water. Anyway, so Milzak Worcha Kamash Fulon, to Loidaka the Chasna Lamedo Bechamua, the Chsuv Sever Ben Sirah, Hakoil Shakalti Bekaf Mazayim. I weighed everything in my weigh scale. V'lematzosi Kal Misubin. I didn't find any worse food than bran. The Kal Misubin, even though I haven't found anything worse than Subin, you know what's even worse than Subin? Chosin Hador B'Veiskam. And the Rishbam tells us the reason for it is one of two items. Either it's chshad, because a mother-in-law loves her first son-in-law, or it's because she might give him too much money and basically steal from her husband to give him money. I don't think they need your mother-in-law to help you with that. They're good at it anyway. Did I just say that? No, I didn't just say that. So the Rashbam speaks out, it's not just a first son-in-law, it's all son-in-laws. But there's an extra chiba from a mother-in-law to the first son-in-law. The Kal Mechason, and even worse, I'm sorry, I think you have to be careful. You only have one Adam.
I never had this problem.
Oh, I'm allowed to say whatever I want. All my daughters are married.
I was thinking the other way from my mother-in-law to me.
The Kal Mechason, Oireyach Machnus Oirech. What's even lighter than the Chason is a guest who invites another guest. The Kal Meirech is Meshiv Davar B'Terem Yishma, someone who answers a question before he even hears the full question. The Nemar, the Rishbam learns because of that, he's not going to have the right answer if he didn't even hear the question. The Nemar Meshiv Davar B'Terem Yishma, Avelas Hiloi, it's an Avlu Chalibin and Tabush. The Mashar doesn't like the Rishbam's pshat. He's weighing, what's he weighing? What is this all about? So Rishbam actually says something very interesting. Kalma Subin. You know what Subin means? Subin means, we learned earlier, we had a Tosis, that when you pay back, let's say you owe somebody money, if you have cash, you have to give him cash. But if not, you can give him even Subin. You can give him anything, right? So someone who borrows money from somebody, so the Malva did him a favor, and then he has the chutzpah to pay back in Subin, that's like a lack of a Koros Atoy. Like, who do you think you are? You had a favor done to you, and then you pay him back with beer bottles? Like, how are you talking? So that's why I didn't find anything less appropriate than someone who received a favor from somebody. Somebody lent the money to help him out, and then he pays him back with subin. But you know what's even worse than that? We know Yaakov said that Lavan's house was gebenched due to Yaakov Avinu. So therefore, someone who says, listen, it's not stealing if my mother-in-law gives me more of my father-in-law's money than I'm supposed to get. It's a stinking entitlement attitude. And even worse than that entitlement attitude, here, at least, I feel like I brought bracha to my father-in-law's house, I'm entitled. But an Eirech B'Chazorch is even worse, because an Eirech brings bracha, and I'm saying not only do I bring bracha, Yener is also going to bring you bracha, let's pack him in also. It's even less appropriate. And then the Kal Mo'erech Meishav Dover B'Terem Yishma, Zokter Ashbam is referring to, even if he answers to the Zach. But that's a big Baal Gaiva, because what's going to happen is eventually he's going to answer before he hears it, and he's going to mess up. And that's how the Marshal learns the sequence of items that Ben Sira was saying was inappropriate. So Zok Gemara, B'Shmuel Lami Refes Bakar Hizu. And then the Mishnah discusses the dimensions of a Refes Bakar. So Refes Bakar Man Katanila. Who is the author of the Refes Bakar? Is it Rabbi Shimon Gamliel telling us how big a Refes Bakar is? Or is it the Chachamim telling us how big a Refes Bakar is? Ika de Amar Rabbi Shmuel Katanila. There are those who hold that it's Rabbi Shmuel is calling it a Refes Bakar. And Rabbi Shmuel is giving us the dimensions of a Refes Bakar, but he's not giving us the dimensions of a house. He's just saying that this 4x6 is not big enough. But how big is a house? That he doesn't say. But he does identify the size of a Refes Bakar. The Ikadami Rabbi Kiva Katanila. Or maybe it's Rabbi Kiva that's saying what the size of a Refes Bakar is. So it could be Rabbi Shmuel who's saying that's a Refes Bakar. Maybe Rabbi Kiva holds a Refes Bakar is even smaller. And maybe he's arguing with Rabbi Kiva, Sayam the size of a Refes Bakar, and Sayam the size of a minimal house. Or maybe it's Rabbi Kiva saying it. This is what he's saying. I do agree with you, Rabbi Shmuel. In fact, that these dimensions are of a Refes Bakar. But that doesn't mean it's not good enough for a person. Sometimes people do make a dira of that size. And therefore, I reject your claim that this can't be a home because it's a refus bucker. It could be both. What you're saying is the size of a house of Rabbi Shmuel is too small. That's the dimensions of a refus bucker. So I write to Lasa, it's refus bucker. Isa arba amos sheish. Tracklin yud al yud. My tracklin. What is tracklin? Zogt Gemara. It's kupsa bevardi. So kupsa bevardi is the Rashbam says it might be a bezoidus. It's some type of enclosure that had a lot of windows in it, and maybe have windows. Maybe Zionists were there to attract people, but it was a room with a lot of windows, almost like a sunroom. Tani, we learned the kantir. There's another type of structure not mentioned in our Mishnah called the kantir. That shteim esrei al yud beis 12 by 12. My kantir tarbis apadni. It's a yard that would be near a king's palace. He would have a beautiful yard that he would have for his enjoyment. Rumoi kechatzi arkoi kechatzi rachboi rai ledavar Rab Shimon ben Gamliel leimer kebinyan haich rai ledavar man katani. Who is saying the word rai ledavar? Ikad Omar Rab Shimon ben Gamliel katani. There are those who understand that it's Rab Shimon ben Gamliel who said that. This is how you read the Mishnah. Rai ledavar minayin. How do you know that the height is kechatzi arkoi ukechatzi rachboi? Amar Rab Shimon Gamliel hakol kebinyan heichel. Just like the Binyan Hechel. But the Ikud Amar, it's the Tanakama who was saying that it's Kechatzi Urku, Kechatzi Rochboi. And the Tanakama was attempting to bring a raya from Binyan Hechel, and Rab Shimon Gamliel cut him off. The Ikud Amar, Tanakama Katanila, Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, Atmoi Kamatama. Bali Gamliel Tanakama. Raya Minayin. Rab Shimon Gamliel says, you're saying Kechatzi Urku, Kechatzi Rochboi. And I know where you want to bring a raya from. You're probably thinking to bring a raya with binyan hechel, but that's impossible. Also, kula almo kivin hechel abdi. Just because the hechel was built this way, does that mean every home would be built that way? But it's very funny because we just learned about responding to somebody before he's finished, and Reb Shimon Gamliel before the Tanakama said their raya, Reb Shimon jumped in and says, "Your raya is for binyan hechel." Not everybody built a binyan hechel. I'm just saying, I don't know. So could be there, if you know for sure what he's going to be finished, how he's going to finish his comments, could be that's not called answering before you hear. Could be it means only if you're missing critical stuff. China we learned. The only place where you have those dimensions would be by the Binyan Hechel. Tanya Chayim Rumai Kukairaisa. You know how high the building has to be, as high as the length of the beams. Now, where are the beams placed? The beams are placed across from one wall to the other wall at the top, right? But that basically means the length of the wall. So, normally, where do you put your beams? You put your beams parallel to the short dimension of the wall. So just say Rumai is karachboy. Why do you have to talk about the beams? Talk about the width of the wall. The way walls were built in those days, like you see by the Kaisel, is each stone is thinner than the stone above. They were actually, walls were built like a pyramid so that they would have stability. So if the wall is only 10 feet at the bottom, at the top it might be 11 feet because the tops of the walls are thinner. So the inner surface is actually bigger. So that the Kairoisov, because that would be a taller, a longer dimension. The beams are longer because how do the beams sit on the wall? They didn't have joist hangers in those days. They would make notches in the wall. The beams would sit inside the wall. So that means the beam is longer than the width of the wall because it actually extends past to be able to fit into the notches. So it means just a little bit of extra length. These might be the beam. Oh, no, those they had flat roofs. Everyone used their roofs in those days. Yeah, everyone used their roofs to prepare us out. They're saying that the normal dimensions of a home would be, the height of it would be the same as the width of it. You want to know where those dimensions have come from? That's how people built houses in those days. It just comes from what the norm was to build a house. If you buy a Victoria Lakes home, is the height the same as the width? Second word, Chanina Nopak Likur. He went to the city, and of course, people asked him Shilas wherever he went. So Ramule Kroya Hadadi. They asked the following steer in Sukkim regarding the dimensions of the Beis Hamikdash that Shlomo HaMelech built. This is mentioned in Malach. Ksivit says, "Va'abayis asher bana HaMelech Shlomo Hashem." The home that HaKadosh Baruch Hu built was Shishim Amma Orkai, which represents 60 amas, because we know the Kodesh, where the Menorah, the Shulchan, and the Mizbeach Hazav was 60 amas, was 40 amas long, it was 40 by 20, and then the Kodesh HaKodeshim, where the Aron Kodesh was 20 by 20. So 40 plus 20 is 60. So Sheisha Amma Rachbay, the Esrim Rachbay, and 20 amas thick. Ushloishim Amma Chimasai. So let's just see if this adds up. 60 plus 20 is 80, and it was 30 high. So it wasn't Kechatzi Orkoi Ukechatzi Rachbay. Uksiv, it also says another pasuk, L'fnei Dvir. Dvir was the separation in between the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadosh. So past the Dvir, meaning the dimensions of the Kodesh HaKodeshim, was Esrim Amma Oirech, Esrim Amma Rochav. That's 20 by 20, right? Which means half of that will be 20. Esrim Amma Kemos, and here it fits in. So the problem here is, was the roof of the Heichal 20 or was it 30? Amar lahu, it was really 30. So how come in the Kodesh HaKodeshim it says that the height was only 20? Ki kachoshev misvas kruvim ulamayla. The kruvim themselves, the Shlomo HaMelech made, they were not like Moshe Rabbeinu's kruvim that physically sat on the kaporos. They actually stood on the floor, and they were 10 amas high. So above the wingtips, above the highest point of the kruvim to the ceiling was 20 amas. But avada, they were 10 amas, so in fact it was 30 amas high. So it adds up. Why can't the pasuk just say it normally? It was 30 amas high. Why say it was 20 amas from the top of the kruvim? Why is that necessary? Zok to Gemara, Hakamash Walon, it teaches you an important lesson. That is lamata kilomaila. The space below the wings of the kruvim were exactly like the space above the wings. Malamaila in Mishamash Klum. There was nothing obstructing the airspace between the top of the wings and the ceiling of the Kodesh HaKodeshim. It was wide open space. Af lamata in Mishamash Klum. So too, if you measure it from the underside of the wing to the floor, it was 10 amas. In other words, the kruvim didn't take up any space at all, which is a concept that we already see. Messiah Leila Rabbi Levi, the Omer Rabbi Levi, Vitemi Rabbi Yochanan, Davar Zeh Messiah Piyadeinu Me'avesenu, Makam Arinu Kruvim Einoi Min Amida. When you measure, the Aron had a size to it, right? We know it was 2.5 amas by 1.5 amas, right? Yet, if you measure it from any side of the Aron to the wall, you're going to get a full 10 amas. So obviously, B'nanais, it didn't take up any space. So Makam Arinu Kruvim Einoi Min Amida. The Lubavitch Rebbe has a famous shtickle on Mokum Arnu Kruvim Eina Min Amida, and he tells that the life in Eretz Yisrael, if you looked at the Aron, it looked like it was a Dover Gashmi. It was made out of Dover Gashmi. It was made out of wood. It was made out of gold. It was made out of standard items. Yet, although it was a Dover Gashmi, it didn't have all the properties of a Gashmi. Didn't take up any space. He says, when you live in Eretz Yisrael, it looks like a normal life. It looks like there's regular business, and there's regular utilities, and there's regular roads. It looks like regular. But if you really look into it carefully, you'll see the whole living in Eretz Yisrael is shaloi kederech hatev. So it's the same idea. Everything looks real. Everything looks like the way what you think would be regular, normal place, but it's completely shaloi kederech hatev. I think that comes out a little more clearly in the past couple of weeks. Tanya Namihachi. They looked like beakers, they felt like beepers, but they weren't necessarily beepers, they were bangers. Right? Tanya Namihachi, we learned as well in the Brisa, Aron Sha'asa Moshe. There's actually a whole shaila. How could Shlomo HaMelech make these kruvim? They weren't how Moshe made them. How can you just make up your own thing? And if you make up your own thing, is that not a pesel? It says a pesel. So it's clear that everything Shlomo HaMelech did was al pi nevuah, and it was al pi atzivah Hashem. you could measure from either side of the Aron to the closest wall, and you're going to get 10 amas. But the whole room was only 20 amas. So clearly, it didn't take up any space. Amar Rav Noy, Amar Shmuel. Kruvim b'nei so yoim. The Kruvim themselves were b'neis, because they didn't either take up any space, but there's another thing. Their dimensions don't let up. Shenemar, the pasuk says, "V'chomesh amis knaf hakruv ha'achas." How long was the wingspan of each wing? Is 10 amas, which means together the two wingspans would have been 10 amas across. V'chomesh amis knaf hakruv hashenis, and the second wing was also 5 amas, meaning eser amos mikzois kappa knopav ad kzois knop, meaning it was 10 amas apart. Now think about it. If it's 10 amas apart, if my arm sticks out 10 amas and this arm sticks 10 amas, it's wider than 10 amas because there's my body too. But the problem is, if you have these two kruvim standing side by side and their wingtips are touching, then the length is more than 20 amas. So if the length is more than 20 amas, knaf of gifayu, the gufayu, if it's mikzois knaf about kzois knaf 10, gufayu hey chavakaimi, where was their body? And we know that the kodesh was only 20 amas by 20 amas. It must be that they were standing al pines. Now, the way we have the picture of the kruvim, they're both on the Aron and they're facing each other. But we're soon going to see that is not how Shlomo HaMelech's kruvim were. They actually were both facing the east. So when you walked into Kodesh HaKodesh, they were staring at you, and there were two kruvim standing side by side. The problem is, standing side by side with their wing spread would be more than 20 amas, because their wings alone are 20 amas, plus their bodies, plus Tosfos adds, even if it is exactly 20. Something that's 20 amas wide will never fit into a room that's exactly 20 amas. You need to leave a little bit of clearance. So you have a Rai Hamid that B'nai Soyoim. Now the Gemara asks a series of kashas that could have explained how this worked without an ace at all. So Maskav Law Abaye. V'dilma Bolton, Ketana Goyal Havakaimi. Now it's mamish the Lubrina strikes again because we're near Kaparis. We all know that when you pick up a chicken, the two wings come out of the same point on the back, and this body is underneath it. So the wings are actually on top of the body. So you could have the two wings that are touching each other, but they're not connected at the outer surface of the chicken. They're connected in the back and the center. So you don't need to have room for the goof because the goof is contained within the wingspan. So there's no right at all that they have to have taken up more than 20 hours. That's number one. Who said they were standing wingtip to wingtip? Maybe their wingtips were overlapping and one wing was behind the other wing. And here the Rashbam is kind enough to give us a picture of it. Maybe they were standing on the diagonal, which actually explains some of the Rishonim. Well, they were touching the Mizrach, Ma'ariv, Tzavin, and Durham. How could they be touching all four walls? Because they were standing in a diagonal. So maybe that's how they were. There's actually a Ritvo who learns that they weren't standing on the diagonal. They were both standing facing the Mizrach, but their wings were sort of twisted to be on a diagonal. So again, if they're on a diagonal, we know the hypotenuse of a triangle is longer than each of the sides. So that would have been able to contain the 20 plus amas. Just like every other wall, the Beis Hamikdash was also built where the upper bricks were smaller than the lower bricks, and the inside got bigger. So maybe higher up, maybe the 20 by 20 is the inside dimensions of the floor. But as you got higher up, it might have been 22 by 22. Who said their arms were completely spread out? Maybe they were somewhat folded. Who said their wings were spread out? Maybe their wings were folded. Maybe they were like hugging themselves. Maybe this is how they were standing. But there's so many different ways that they could have been standing where they wouldn't have had a problem taking up 20 amas. So you don't have a raya from their mere dimensions that they were like the Aron, that they didn't take up space. So what was the position of these kruvim? They were looking at each other. They were both facing the east, meaning facing the entrance of the Kodesh HaKodeshim when you went inside. And there's a pasuk. There's a pasuk that says that they were Pneim Ich Alochiv, and there was a pasuk that says Pneim Labayis. By in the Torah when it discusses the Kruvim of Moshe, it calls it Ish Alochiv, but it says in the Lochem Pneim Labayis. So if you hold that they were facing each other, Haksiv Pneim Labayis, how do you explain that? Zokmer Lakasha. Kan bizman she Yisrael oisin returning shalmakim. Kan bizman she ein Yisrael oisin returning shalmakim. When they were originally put in facing each other, but when Klal Yisrael wasn't doing returning shalmakim, to show them, Hakadosh Baruch Hu made them both turn 90 degrees to face the east and not facing each other. But Avada L'Chatchila they were set up facing each other. So here you can't say because they wouldn't have set it up originally not facing each other. So you have to learn the mitzadadi at meaning their taka are facing each other, but they're sort of at an angle similar to someone backing away from a rebbe. Tanya Uncle Sager Amar Uncle Sager said, "Kruvim maset tzatzuim heim." They were like young kids. Umutzadadin pneim ketalmud hanifter mera. So there's an interesting shaila about kan bezman she Yisrael oisim v'tzoyin shlomokim kan bezman she ein Yisrael oisim v'tzoyin shlomokim. Because we know by Chorban Abayis when they went into the base of Mikdash, I'm not sure if it was the Romans or the Greeks, they went in and they found the two kruvim that were looking at each other, maybe even hugging each other, which is even more than how this Gemara describes it. And they said, "Look, this is like znus. This is inappropriate for a makam kedusha, which is a zaytik azar, because we hold zivug between the man and the wife is the holiest of the holiest of unions. But by the goyim, who they don't know, they have misplaced ideas of what kedusha is. They think that's bad. But akalpanim, there during the korban, it was surely ein oisin mitzayin shamakam. So there's two terutzim that are brought down. I forgot who Rabbi Rata quoted from. He said two terutzim. One is a beautiful shot. The disputes that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has with us is none of the goyim's business. So to the goyim, we're going to show that everything's fine and dandy. Yes, I have a problem with my yin. I'm dealing with it, but I love my children. So as far as you're concerned, everything is hunky dory. That's one shot. The other shot is fakeret. The Rebbeinu Shalom made it b'dafke so that they should become a vuza, that Klal Yisrael should become a vuza because of how these proven were, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu was trying to punish them. So the first shot is more geshmak for us. The Rebbeinu says, what I have with my children, goyim, none of your business. You might think you want to destroy the Eden. No. I'm on their side. Now I have to do this to them. They need the therapy. Zog to Gemara weiter.
Right?
Oh, that's right. That's the third shot that said that even when people divorce with Manal Club, they usually cry when they divorce. When you're breaking up a relationship, it's very painful. It creates a scarvis. Zog to Gemara. Thank you very much. Zog to Gemara weiter. Misheyesh lebar lifnim mi beisa shalchaver. What if there was a Yerusha that was split up, or it was bought this way, but whatever the case is, I own a bar and it's in your home. So I can't just barge in whenever I want and use it. So therefore, nichnas, v'shah, shederech b'nei adam nichnasin, I can go in during normal business hours. V'yoytze b'shah, shederech b'nei adam yoytze. But v'einei machlis behemtoi, umash kami boyoi. You never have a right to pull your behemoth into his house. Elam amalei, you could fill up a bucket of water from your bar, umashka mibachutz, and you could feed your animal outside. Now, both parties get to lock the door, so that means neither party can be there unless the other party is there. Who is this Pesachas for? The lock that they each make is to get into the bar. Each of them has a lock to get into the bar, and both of them have to be unlocked to get into the bar. Balabar, I understand why the Balabar wants to have a lock. He doesn't want the Balabais to steal from his water. Why should the Balabais have a lock to be able to lock the bar and prevent the owner of the bar from getting in? The reason for it is Mishum Cheshad Ishtai. It's because of Cheshad Ishtai, meaning if he's going to be able to come whenever he wants, even when the owner of the house is not there, it's going to look bad. It'll be a Cheshad. But this way, he'll always have to be there. Zok to Gemara weiter. We split up a garden, and one of the partners received a garden that he had to walk through his friend's garden to get to this garden. Allah is again, nichnas b'shah shaderech b'nei adam nichnasin, v'yoytze b'shah shaderech b'nei adam yoytze. A garden is more in your own home, it's your own property. It's not like it's out in the fields. Therefore, you only can come in during normal business hours. You're not allowed to have your own meeting there. You're not allowed to use that garden as a place for your business meetings to discuss things. Or the Rishbam speaks out, even if they want to buy the Yerokas from your garden, you'll have to bring them a sample. You can't bring in people to barge in because this is the other guy's personal space. You shouldn't use this route as an entrance to get into an adjacent field. Rather, you should go around to get into the adjacent field. In other words, you only have a right to come and to access your garden. You have no other right to come into my property. Now, even this walkway that I have to be able to walk through the outer property to get to my gina, can you plant that area? It's a strip of land the size of a walkway. So the halach is v'achitzayin zoyreya esader. Even though I can walk through it, he has a right to plant there. I have a right to walk on what he planted, but he could plant it. His chus. In other words, I only have a right of access. I have no rights to the property itself. The property itself belongs to the chita. What happens if nosnu loy derech minatzad midash shneim? What if Bezdin negotiated with them and they did something, and they both agreed that there's going to be a designated path on the side, not to walk right through the middle? So then that we consider his property in Gansen, and therefore nichnas b'shashu reitze v'yoytze b'shashu reitze, and umachnas l'soicha tagorin, because that if it's negotiated Bezdin, then it's his mamash. But you still shouldn't use it as an access to a different field because that wasn't the right that was given. And in this case, neither one is allowed to plant that path. What if someone says, I'm selling you an Amma Beis Hashloch, which means it's an irrigation canal that's used to irrigate a field that needs irrigation, that cannot rely on rainwater. So the halach is, there's two ways to learn this. Either it means the brook itself has to be 2 amos wide, plus there's access on either side of an amma to the person who bought this brook, so that if he has to fix the edges, he can access. There are those who learn that it's the 2 amos is inclusive of everything. Okay, la'akpe, in order that he could fix the edges if they start collapsing, and he could fix up the retaining walls. What about Amma Beis Akiloin Ani Moichelach, which is a little bit of a smaller brook of water? Noisli Amma Achas L'Soicha L'Chatzi Amma Mikan Chatzi Amma Mikan La'akpe. The access that he was given to be able to be on either side of this little river, Mizoiram, who has the right to plant them? And Zoireya means to plant like vegetables whose roots grow out, not down, and therefore could possibly damage a retaining wall. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel says Balasada Zoiram, and Rabbi Nachman Amar Shmuel said Balasada Noita. The Balasada is not allowed to plant vegetables because that will erode the edge of the little river, but he could plant trees there because there the roots grow down and they will not erode. Manda Amar Zoiram Kolshke Noita. If you can plant vegetables, which is damaging to the edges of the river, surely you can plant a tree which will not damage the edge of the river. Because they will loosen up the soil. What if the sides eroded? So you need earth to build up a retaining wall. Where do you get the earth from? Misakna me'oisesada. You could take the earth from that field to fix the retaining wall. He doesn't have to truck and sand from other places, because technically the owner of the property can say, the river washed the silt down the river. This is not, it didn't deposit the earth on the side, it deposited down the river. So you get your own earth. But no, he has a right to take from the field around. If in fact there was erosion, it would have pushed the earth into the field. So in fact, you're entitled to that earth to repair your little river. Mayich ashpulu la'arich. Let him say, it's not your earth, your water washed it away. Don't come to me. Alamar Papa, you're right. The reason why he has a right to take the earth from either side is not because that's where it eroded to. It's because Shamanat Kain, Kibul Allah Balasad. Whenever there's a sale, just like I'm giving you access to the sides to repair, I'm also including in it that I'm always going to give you earth that you would need to repair it, should it be necessary. So it's not because that's where the earth went, it's because that's what the deal was. Really, we only have to get to here because we're already going to be starting the daf of the first Rosh Hashanah. But if we can learn a little bit into Rosh Hashanah's daf, then it'll be a skula that a whole year will always be ahead on our payments. We'll never be behind on our payments. We'll always have money long before we need to spend it because we can have it in advance. So it's a good skula. Amen. Amen. What happens if there's a derech harabim that's going through my property? Not law, and I don't want them barging directly through my property. So I figured I'll take that away. I'll put a gate that won't let people go there. But and I said, you know what? Now go around along the side of my property, so you're not traipsing through my property. They get the new route that you gave them, but so the deal didn't work because he doesn't get the original route back. What if it was derech hayochid? Dalar amis. Whenever you're selling a derech hayochid, you have to sell them dalar amis. Derech harabim, if you're making a deal with the public to sell them a derech harabim, you're giving them a sheish esrayama, you're giving them a very wide path. Derech hamelech ein lashir. We know a melech has something called eminent domain. Whatever property he feels he needs for whatever reason, he can take away. So he can take a derech through your property, he can take as big as he wants. Derech hakever ein lashir. The derech hakever ein lashir, but the Rashbam explains, it doesn't mean they can seize anything they want. It means while they're going to a levaya, they're allowed to walk through your property. Or it could be referring to if you sold a route to get to Kvarim, again, it includes whatever the people need. Hamaimid Dayone, what about a Maimid? Dayoni Tzipur Aimer, base Arba Kabin. If you're selling for a Maimid, how much are you giving? Base Arba Kabin. What a Maimid is, Zokter Rishpam, the Gemara, the Farish. Base Arba Kabin, just to illustrate how much that is, we need a little bit of geometry. One kav is 1/6 of a saw. We know a base saw is 50 by 50, which is 2,500 square amas. So if you do 2,500 divided by 6, you get 1666, right? I'm sorry, 2,500 divided by 6 is less than that. 2,500, which is a saw, divided by 6 would be a base kav, which is 416.666. But we're saying base arba kav. So 416 and 2/3 times 4 is 1666.666. If you take the square root of that, if you take the square root of 1666.66, it's about 42 and something. So let's get our square root. Let's get our square root over here. Let's get our square root again. 1666.666. And I want to get the square root of it. Let's see if my it's 40.82. 40.82 is the square root of 16.66. So if you just look at the last Rashi, it will say Nimtzas base arba kavin is shalosh or shloshim amis ushnei tfachim tavameal chamishim, or it could be if you want to look at a square, it's mem amos v'dalat tfachim v'gimel boys, which is basically 40.824 square amos. With geometry, it's a little bit easier to figure it out. Zok Gemara weiter. Amai shaloi lo higiya. I don't understand. If what we're saying is that if they got to keep my new route, it means my transaction was valid. If my transaction was valid, why can't I claim the original route back for myself? Linked Pizra, Velazif. Let this owner of the property take with a pitchfork by that entrance and put up a big sign, forget the dog, beware of owner, right? And stop people from going through. If they were entitled to the new piece of property that he gave for the walkway, obviously the transaction was valid. so let him stop people from trampling through the property where in the area that he wanted to reclaim. We see from here, you see from here that since we don't let him do that, even though he's entitled, even though Me'ikar din, it should be his, but we don't let people do their own din, no such thing as vigilante justice. I feel even if here if he waits to go to Bezdin, he's going to lose out because he's got to stop the people right now from walking through there. No, you don't have a raya. Maybe it's Gzeira, Shema, Yitin Lahen, Der Chakalasim. Really, a person could make his own din. A person could do vigilante justice. But over here, we're afraid he'll take advantage of them. We're afraid he won't give them a good route. So in this particular case, we invalidate the swap that he tried to make. No, it's been nice on Der Chakalasim. Really, he could do that. When our Mishnah says you can't, our Mishnah is referring to a case where he gave them a bad route. And that's why he sort of counted that what he gave them they get to keep, but he doesn't get to claim back what he wanted to take back. Rav Ashi Amar, it's always der hakalosin because the route was straight through your property. Now you're putting it either to the left side or the right side. For someone coming from the other side, it's going to be a bad route. So therefore, whenever you move a route, it's going to be farther away for one person and it'll be closer for the other person. Right? The Gemara, okay. So now we know why he can't take back the old route. But at least, okay, if my transaction is not valid, at least give me back what I gave you. Hamani Rabbi Eliezer, it's going according to Rabbi Eliezer, the Tanya Rabbi Yudo Eimer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbim Shabaru Derech La'atma. If a Rabbim seizes a route, even if it was inappropriate that they did, as the Rishbam says, even if it was Shaloi Notlu Rishus Nibala Soda, too bad. Mashabaru Baru. The Rabbim gets the advantage. They take something, it's theirs. Correct, Gemara. Are you saying Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbim Gazlonim? What are you telling the Rabbim Gazlonim? They'll just steal people's properties? Amarav Gidol Amarav? No, it's Kagoyin Sha'abdul Lahen Derech Ba'isasa. It's speaking in a case where there was always a public route going through there, but it was forgotten where it was. There they can seize. Normally, if a private person had a route through my field and we forgot where it was, now he wants to come. So it's a moitze mechavel v'raya, meaning I have to give him a route, but I can pick the route that I want, and I can say prove it's different, and I can give him the path that I want. And when it comes to a rabbim, if they're entitled to a path, they can grab whichever path they want, and it's too bad for the individual. I'm sorry? Correct. Ihaki frekti gemara. Ihaki amai omar Rabba barafuna amarav ein halacha Rabbi Eliezer. If Rav over here if Rav Gidol Marav, meaning if Rav is the one who's tidying up the Mishnah to follow the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer, so how could Rav say he doesn't pass like Rabbi Eliezer? He's using Rabbi Eliezer to explain our Mishnah. If you learn Pshat in the Mishnah, and if you say that Rav learned Pshat in the Mishnah, using Rabbi Eliezer, that it's working with Rav and Shabar Derech Latzman, yeah, then you can't say that Rav is passing against Rabbi Eliezer. So it was a discrepancy in what Rav said. V'taimamai. So if you don't know like Rabbi Eliezer, how else would you explain our Mishnah? Mishum Rabbi Yehuda, Amarav. Mishum Rabbi Yehuda. What does the Bach say on the Aleph? Mishum Rabbi Yehuda, Amarav, right? Rabbi Yehuda, Amarav. Meitzer, a different svara. Meitzer shechsiku boy Rabbim also lakalkaloi. If there's a path that the Rabbim started to use, you're not allowed to ruin that. So it's a new svara of Meitzer shechsiku boy Rabbim, and that for sure everybody agrees. Correct more for Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbim b'mai kanela. According to Rabbi Eliezer, how would the Rabbim koin it in the first place? Right? It was Avdlam Derech, and then they got a kinyan of it. How did they get a kinyan? According to Rav Yehuda Marav, if they were machzik, they started using it, that's the kinyan. But where is the kinyan for the Rabbim, according to Rabbi Eliezer? The Gemara, kanile, or behilucha, by walking through it. The Tanya halach bala, arkol rachba, kana makamiluchai, divrei Rabbi Eliezer. If you walk the length and the width of a property, that is a kinyan. The Chacham you have to make a chazaka. Amar Belazar, my time out there, Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, what is this for, Rabbi Eliezer? That walking through property, walking its borders, is a kinyan. So you see, that's the way through which HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Avram Avinu land. Rabbanan no. Hashem mishum chavidusa d'Avram hu dekarmelei. Kedei kamelei hachi kedei sheyei noach lichvosh lifnei vanav. It was just symbolic to sort of give it to Avram Avinu symbolically, which would pave the way for his children to Yarshin Eretz Yisrael when the time came. Okay, we'll stop here. Beshem, we'll start here on the first day of Yom Tov at 5 o'clock. Shavakit kebench the Yor, a Yor of Simcha, Brucha, a Shefa, Rav, Berachnis of the Gashmis.